welcome, guys. We'll probably have a few more people kind of join us, coming in out a little bit to see Mr. Jefferson. But I wanted to introduce our guests here today. If I have my glasses, whatever I did with them. On my left over here is going to be Jason Galui. Right? He is a former retired lieutenant colonel and combat veteran. He is the director for veterans and military families at the George W. Bush Institute. He's advised at the Pentagon under Presidents Obama and Trump, right? Let me know if I get anything wrong, because it's possible. Was a deputy executive secretary for the National Security Council. Has a long academic resume, including West Point, like teaching at West Point. And he's on the steering committee for the Prosper Exchange, which is kind of what brings him here today, as we have a guest tonight at the PISD community room. And on my right, we have the esteemed Thomas Jefferson, who hails from Virginia, as you well know. And he brags about Virginia a little bit, seems to like it more than others. But you know that he was a primary drafter of the Declaration of Independence at 33 years old. Second Minister to France under the United States, was the Secretary of State under Washington. He rivaled to and a VP under President Adams, which was kind of an interesting way that the Constitution worked out there. Third President of the United States after the election of 1800, which he loves. And then he is often remembered, right, for the Louisiana Purchase. So did some major things in our history in the United States. And so I want you to, let's give a welcome to Mr. Galui and Mr. Jefferson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nichols and Dr. Ferguson. Thanks for joining us today. And it's great to be here, and I'm really pleased to have Thomas Jefferson visit with us. As Mr. Nichols said, he's here to talk to the Prosper Exchange, which is something tonight. Just so for you all awareness that Prosper Exchange is something the town of Prosper started along with the Prosper Economic Development Corporation. If you don't know what that is, that's all these retail centers that are going up and all the development happening as a result of the town of Prosper and the Prosper Economic Development Corporation. It makes our lives better. But those two entities, we launched the Prosper Exchange, which is a in-person only public forum to engage in civil dialogue, civil discourse and honest dialogue around our country's most challenging issues. So I think we live in a very contentious time, and maybe Mr. Jefferson will share with us the contentious times that they experienced 250 years ago. But the challenges we face today are solved by engaging one another in civil ways to make progress. And so that's what the Prosper Exchange is designed to do. We launched it last year. We discussed immigration, taxation, and democratic principles. This year we decided that in 2024, another presidential election year, perhaps one of our most contentious in front of us. We said, let's get a founding father and let's ask one question. And that question there is, what is freedom? So tonight, that's what we'll discuss at the community room. So he was very gracious enough to come here this afternoon and share his thoughts with you on what is freedom. And then as he's engaged, I encourage you to engage with him. It's a great opportunity to hear from Mr. Jefferson and all that he has set up. And no question is off limits. Ask the hard questions. This is your opportunity. I don't want you all to leave here at the end at 2 o'clock and say, man, I wish I asked him this. If you leave here with your friends and one of your friends is saying, I should have asked this, man, this is your chance. This is it. So with that, I turn it over to Mr. Jefferson.
I know not of the next opportunity you'll have to ask Mr. Jefferson anything, right? What think you? Will it happen again in your lifetime? So indeed, let us lasso this opportunity we have in front of us. In the short litany of accomplishments, there is one that by no fault of your own, because I have so many accomplishments, there was one that is left off, but I greatly admire, and that is father of the University of Virginia.
Yes.
Every man needs a retirement project, yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
And after leaving the high executive in this country, that is the president, after my second term in my retirement, I begin the University of Virginia. So if any of you are seeking a higher system of education after this fundamental place upon which you now stand. If you're looking at a college, there's only one. And that's University of Virginia.
What of the one that you attended, which was the William and Mary?
Oh, we don't need to talk about that.
Okay.
At William and Mary, I did attend William and Mary. That was the only college in all of Virginia when I was
Right.
growing up, when I was your age. How many of you are 17 years of age? So when I was your age, I began looking at a higher system of education. I had provided for me by my parents money for education. And when I was growing up, we didn't have a system of publicly funded education. Does that seem fair? Does it seem just? Does that seem like freedom? So we lived in that time under the monarchy, right? We were attached to the crown, and aristocracy was alive and well in that time. So being an aristocratic family, my father had funds to provide education for me. Is education a right? Did you bring your minds with you this afternoon? Are you a Homo sapien? We were just discussing this recently. Sapien, do you speak Latin? It's just you and I. How far we have fallen as mankind. Sapientia is Latin for reason, and we being Homo sapiens, we are expected to use reason. Yes?
Yes.
What a terrible fault we would find ourselves in if we are gifted with reason and yet we do not use it. When I went to college, at the one college in all of Virginia, William and Mary, I attended William and Mary for 2 years. I received no degree, and then I moved back in with my mother. So you'll do better, yes?
Yes.
But I had the freedom to attend college, the financial freedom to attend college. When I think of freedom, for me, this is, it's about choice. If you have the freedom to choose options. When a country begins to demean, deny, and erode your systems of options, you are no longer a free people, right? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
There are countries in my time, countries in your time, who deny their people systems of choice, right? And what is that but a lack of freedom? You are confined, no longer the choice from your sapient reason is disallowed by your government, saying this is disallowed for whatever reason. Now, I'm not talking about natural rights or systems of rights that man creates for man's civil rights that exist different from natural rights, meaning should you have the freedom to kill another man? No, why not? But isn't that freedom, you would say? Maybe some, maybe not, none of you. Say again?
You're infringing on the freedom of someone else's.
There's that word, infringing. Infringing on what? Their life, which is you were saying it, which is a what? A natural right. When we discuss freedoms, we also have to discuss natural versus civil right. Your freedom to your own God, or gods, or lack of God. Should your government infringe upon that?
No.
Should you have freedom?
Yes.
Choice, right? What about this? To choose for yourself your own government? Is that freedom?
Yes.
Have you read a little document called the Declaration of Independence?
Certainly.
You have? Do you recall the section where I say it is your natural right for any people to choose for themselves a system of government which produces for them the greatest amount of happiness?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
This, it just rolls off your tongue. This is choice. This is freedom. And yet there are governments around the world who remove from their people the freedom to change their own government. Right? The greatest freedom you have in this country is change. When we granted you a crown in 1776, you know, it was not radical to declare independence. That's not radical. That's not audacious. Nations have been doing that since time immemorial. What is radical about 1776 is after taking the crown off of one man's head, we turned right round and placed that crown upon all men. That is radical freedom. Well, let me pause here. All men? Well, that is the phrase, yes. It was a question. I said we turned right round and placed the crown upon whom?
Rich.
Oh, I thought you said the French. I was suddenly quite confused. The rich, the wealthy, I would say many times it leaned in that direction, but I understand where you're coming from, but not entirely, but yes. What else? Was it all men?
No.
Who was lacking?
Men of color.
Men of color. Is that freedom?
No.
Are they granted the same natural rights that white men are?
Yes.
And yet our government disallowed it? Might you posit, what's your name?
Isaiah.
Isaiah, prophetic indeed. Might you posit that rights that exist in nature are denied by government?
In examples where a government does not value or truly appreciate the full rights of man, yes.
Appreciate or value the full rights of men. Well, even that can be dissected by attorneys. The full rights of man. Well, some would say this is the full rights, and some would say, nay, this is the full rights. And others would say, this. So even that word full. It's a very strange thing. In nature, man is born free, equal, and independent. That's a phrase that I stole for the Declaration of Independence. I made it a bit flashier. But I stole it from John Locke in his treatise number 2 on government, second treatise. John Locke says that in nature, man is born free, equal, and independent. So nature is perfect. If we were all born in nature, we would all be born as equals, right? It's only in government that we find inequality. Isn't that strange? So when we talk about freedom, what does it mean? What is it? I think we might look to nature as a model and an example. An attempt to create laws of man that models, mirrors, ventriloquizes, echoes what we see in nature. How's that for an answer?
It's a start, Mr. Jefferson.
It's a start.
It's a very good starting place.
Well, how long do you have? I can keep going. I wish, as do we all, this to be a Socratic system of education. That is, through the questions and answers, might we delve ever deeper into the collective well of human knowledge. That's good. I should write that down. I'll remember it. Is that amenable to you, friends?
Yes.
That I can ask of you to have an equal share in this conversation as we have an equal share in the stake and stock of this government? Yes?
Yes.
You brought your minds with you?
Yeah.
Are you ready to speak? Those 3 of you can stay, the rest of you there's Nick. I shall, in proper parliamentary procedure, cede the remainder of my time to the people. Is there a second for this motion? Has been so seconded. You were just a hair late, Isaiah. The motion has been seconded. It's now before the floor for a vote. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Unanimous. I like unanimity. Although I do like debate as well, with some. Not Hamilton. No one likes that. Except for Hamilton. The floor is yours, friends. We can discuss anything truly under the sun. There is no such thing as a taboo or stupid question. My only demand is that you treat me and the subject with respect. And if we do that, then truly, we can discuss everything. I say there's not a blade of grass that grows uninteresting to me. So whatever subject you wish to discuss, we can discuss. States' rights, federal rights, policy, platform, foreign policy, domestic policy, taxation, government theory, philosophy, natural philosophy, botany, zoology, chemistry, astronomy, anatomy, language, music, art, architecture. It matters not to me. There is not a blade of grass that grows uninteresting to me. So who would be bold, brave, and ask the first curiosity? Yes.
So when we are looking at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, a lot of it is talking about the freedoms that are granted, the natural freedoms that are granted to people. Things like the freedom to life, the freedom to property, things of that nature. But I feel like recently I've heard a lot more discourse on not necessarily the freedom to own something or the freedom to choose your own religion, the freedom from things, the freedom from fear about your life, or the freedom from fear of government overreach, which I feel like sometimes can be a lot harder to define than, say, the freedom to own property. And how is it that issues like that can be addressed in, a civil way that we're kind of discussing?
What's your name?
Hudson.
Hudson. Be a good place for West Point, wouldn't it? You're wearing an engineering shirt.
I am.
You've heard of the engineering school at West Point?
I have, yes.
Sign them up.
Do you know who signed that thing into being?
I can't say I do. That's I can make an informed guess.
Can you?
Yes.
Any guesses?
Was it you?
Correct, yes. First engineering school, I believe, in the United States of America. Is this okay to use?
Yeah,
It's
there
not
for
a
you.
prop. This is a fascinating question. So, freedom for, freedom of, freedom from. These are small connecting words, but to an attorney they mean everything, right? Freedom for, you can already cogitate upon this. Freedom for something, as opposed to freedom of something, as opposed to freedom from something. If I talk to you for 24 hours, Hudson, about one specific policy that you were deeply opposed to before our conversation, and I gently beat you into submission with a 24-hour stump speech, would on hour number 25, would your mind have changed?
Yes.
You grant me such grandiosity of persuasion. I'm not an orator. It's said of me that I cannot string 3 sentences together verbally, that I have a high-pitched and squeaky voice, and that I have a bit of a stutter. If you wish someone to stand in front of you and persuade you, then the greatest Demosthenes of our age would be Patrick Henry, greatest orator of our age. I have some skill with the quill, but not with speechification. So do you wish to adjust your answer? Would I persuade you on hour number 25?
I believe that you could, yes.
Knowing that my powers of persuasion in voice are entirely lacking, and I did not have access to quill, my greatest skill, would you on hour 25 have changed your mind?
No.
Ah! But here's what I'm getting at. Men can force you at the point of sword or gun to kneel to a certain king. Men can force you to pray at the tip of a bayonet. It does not mean that you will suddenly believe in that God, though you might say the words to spare your life, right? There is no law that I could make. If I if I deeply loved Catholics, and I said, this nation is entirely Catholic. We had a king who changed the religion of England so he could get a divorce. Do you think, regardless of his self-interest in that moment, for divorce mensa et thoro, do you think suddenly all of England had changed their religion? So how can we create a law to guard against fear? If man cannot inject itself and bifurcate your mind and dictate what you must believe or must not believe, if this is unnatural, though man may try, to dictate your belief system, can I ever create a law that guards against fear? Sorry, I could create one. Would it work? Would it work? I asked the room. No. Why not?
I think it could work if you weren't educated and you just didn't go out and do your own due diligence. And you're like, oh, I believe whatever he says.
Mhm.
I'm scared now. I have fear.
Mhm.
Just a thought.
So might education be the salve to the nation itself,
Yes. And also, what if I just didn't care enough?
or apathy?
Ah, yes.
Do you know? I quite like you. I don't know how you know this, but apparently you've done a great deal of reading about it. I say there are 2 pitfalls to any country, or I'm sorry, any republic: apathy and ignorance, which is exactly what you're speaking of.
I see a lot of that these days.
Uh-huh. How do we guard against ignorance?
Education.
How do we guard? That's an easy one. How do we guard against apathy? You're awfully quiet, you quartet. How do we guard against apathy? You know what apathy is? What is it?
Like excitement and passion, lack of passion.
Lack of passion, excitement, engagement, involvement, commitment. How do we guard against apathy?
By creating groups for everybody, that everybody can agree with, like different parties where most people can form to fit one or the other, that usually brings more passion or excitement for whichever one you support.
Just like you and James Madison, we believe parties are the answer. 2-party system? Maybe more?
It's worked for a while, so.
has worked for a few years. Is it working well? I say that the answer to the first is the answer to the second in education. An educated people, learned people will see superstitions and chains of bondage fade like mist in the morning. I also say this: I know of no safer depository of the powers of government than in the people themselves. And if we see that the people are not using that power responsibly, it is not our job to take it from them, it is our job to educate them. And then I end with, education is the sole corrective for any abuse, any constitutional abuse. Education is the answer. So people might be swayed, uneducated people especially might be swayed against their own self-interest because they do not have the tools to utilize their own sapient reason to guard against malicious men who spin and twistify the hearts of other minds and men against their own self-interest through the powers of speechification. A great orator might turn the people against themselves. Have you seen this in your time?
Yes.
Yes.
The best bulwark we have against this is education. So I can't make a law against fear, but education can create a wall against fear in your mind. Yes? It's a very long answer. I promise not all of my answers will be so long, but I am an attorney and I get paid by the word. What else? Excellent question. Thank you, Hudson. Yes, and then I see you.
You did say that education was a natural right, but some people decide not to go for education. So are you saying their ignorance is because they were not able to learn from the mandated education K through 12, or are you saying their ignorance is due to their own actions?
So first of all, we have to create a system of publicly funded education for this to be allowed in this country, which means someone needs to write a bill for publicly funded education. Any guesses, Hudson, as to who wrote that bill?
I leave that to you.
Thank you. In Virginia, I read 126 bills from the year 1777 to 1779. I'm the most active legislator in the entire Western Hemisphere, and one of these bills, bill numbered 79, applies for publicly funded education for men and... Any guesses? You want to say women, you'd be right. Publicly funded education for men and women. For the first time in Virginia, we have a proposal in bill form, a proposal that all have access to education. Everyone, regardless of your sex, regardless of how much money you make or do not make. I proposed that in 1777. You're just in time. I proposed that in 1777. Anyone know when I die? I mean, not yet, but... Anyone know when I die? 1876. 1876?
July 4th, 50th year after the signing of the Constitution.
Congratulations. 50 years after the adoption of the, that's all right, the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1826. When did I propose the bill? 1777. I die when? 1826. Do you know in the entire time frame, I proposed the bill and it has not passed even upon my death. So I can open the door, I can provide the pathway for educated people generally. But if men in power choose an ignorant people because they're easier to control, then it is not the people's fault. It is status quo, tyranny of the majority, self-interest at the heart of this thing, right? So the question is, how do you get men in power to vote for something because it's the right thing to do? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
And I see you.
If higher education is this for all women, if education is this for all women, higher education beyond some means, beyond some people's means.
You mean through financial means? There's
most cases.
Mm-hmm. You know, my three-tiered system of education, as I proposed earlier, it's bill numbered 79 in the batch of 126. My tiered system of education includes a third tier, which is a higher system of education. Tier number 1 is paid for by everyone, no one has to pay. Tier number 2, if you have money, you can attend, except for those top 10% in the first tier who do not have the funds for it. Those people are paid for by the state to attend the second tier. They may not have the money, but as I say, we would all benefit from the next Bacon, Newton, and Locke. They might be out there, but through disallowance of funds, they are disallowed the educational opportunity to bring mankind, like the great tide rising all ships, bring us all together. So, does that make sense? Top 10% who can't pay, they're paid for in the second tier. And third tier, there's a similar operation, top 10% who cannot pay make it to the third sphere. That's a sort of a collegiate type of education. So, is there a wall? Is there a point of diminishing returns, or a pay wall, you might say? The answer is yes. However, there's an automatic scholarship for the brightest amongst us. Education is expensive. It's not the most expensive industry a government may take upon. That's war. But education is quite expensive. However, we do ourselves a greater disservice by the lack of education than with education. And I'll end with this. Education, we've been talking about education, education, education. And in all of these references of the word education, I am pointing towards a formal system of education, right? There's informal systems of education as well. Some of the wealthiest people in Williamsburg, Virginia, weren't formally educated into Latin. They're tradesmen, and that's an education. These are wheelwrights, blacksmiths, tinsmiths. Especially when we engage in war, how important are those industries? We see a rise of a middle class throughout the Revolutionary War, and it's because of, it's not because of education, it's because of need and tradesmen. Trades is an education, just like formal education. Does that make sense? What else? I love these questions, yes.
I was going to ask, what's your opinion on what Washington said in his farewell address?
About no parties, or which part?
No parties.
Mm-hmm. Did I lead the witness here, or did you actually have something? Was that what you were aiming at? All right. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Washington was guarding against the idea of parties becoming abusive to people. Parties, an amalgamation of men who think similarly, perhaps are useful. It might help with engagement, guarding against apathy. Washington was guarding against party being weaponized. Parties are fine. In fact, I was speaking with some students just an hour ago, and I used an analogy of the planets. I said I could make a law that says the planets move in squares. Does that change how planets orbit? No. It goes against nature, right? Think on that. Don't lose that thought. If this were our nation, we 35 people, if this were our nation, would we all think the same politically?
No.
Could I make a law, me being the king of this nation, could I make a law that says no parties? Could I make that law?
Yes.
Would it affect you?
No.
You would still find men who think like you. So parties are natural. Washington offering sentiment against party. Washington is not a stupid man. He knows that parties are natural. What he's guarding against is the abuse of party. What he's guarding against is when men choose party over nation. That's the danger. And I can't create a law against that either, right? I can't. But you can fight it. You can fight it tooth and nail with every conversation you have. You can fight it by purchasing into news sources that are factual, that don't rely on hot passion for their income. They rely on data, on fact, on reasoned argument, right? So you can subscribe to those erudite systems of information from the media and push away whatever Twitter is called now, right? That's what you can do. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
James Madison and I create parties in 1791. Well, close enough. We're on a fishing trip on Lake George, upstate New York, Lake George. We're catching the Hessian fly, among other things. But while on that fishing trip, we've taken a journey. It's America's first bromance, he and I. And we take a journey, and it's also the first American road trip. We stop in Annapolis, in Philadelphia, in Boston, in New York City. And land in Lake George. And by the time we've got to Lake George, we have heard enough of the voice of the people that we think that the one party that exists at that time, anyone know the name of that one? Huh? Say again. The Federalists. Good round of applause for my young friend. Federalism is a wonderful party for the state. It's a terrible party for the people. Federalism relies on an aggrandizement of federal power to the eventual subjugation and tyranny of the people at large. Mr. Madison and I stand against this idea of federalism. And by the time we made this journey, what we've been doing is we've been talking with people in taverns, talking with judges, talking with authors and statesmen, and people in line to water their horses at a trough. By the end of this journey, we feel like we have a pretty good pulse of the people. And we feel like that by attaching our policy, our platform for this new party, to what we're actually hearing the people want, we can overturn Federalists and create a true party for the people. And we'll win. In fact, we'll beat the Federalists down so hard they're not even a party in your time. And we'll win so hard that we have both parties, the Democratic Republicans. I got off on a tangent. All I had to say was I don't believe Washington was guarding against party. He was guarding against abuse of party. That could have been also a very short answer, but I specialize in long answers when a short one would do just fine. Is there a follow-up?
Do you think that the parties now do abuse that power?
In what way?
Kind of, it almost seems sometimes that you really, beyond the two parties that we have, like you can vote third party, but it wouldn't have much of an effect. And third parties can influence the two parties by like ideals, but like it's always going to be the two parties no matter what you do. So would you say that's more of what Washington is warning about, not the parties themselves?
Well, I think I stand on my sentiment, knowing the man and knowing his other writings around this topic. I think I stand on my initial sentiment that he was guarding against abuse when men choose party over nation, when politics becomes more important than saving the Union, preserving our republic. As to your specific time in 2024, can you imagine how many parties there might be, and yet it's only a two-party system? I say that two parties are not enough. I say we need more. So I would perhaps look at your party system and say, at least you have more than two parties. Maybe we can look at ways in which to give those parties more power. There are other systems of voting. It doesn't have to be simple majority through an electoral college. We can have first past post voting, for example. So the bottom candidate is dropped over time, and in the end, we can then encourage more candidates with actual choice and actual support in the primary, the preliminary votes, all these votes that don't matter until the one that does. That might be a system worth looking at. We created a system. We never called it a perfect system. We wanted to create a what union?
More perfect.
So how barbaric of us if we were to say perfect, right? We know that. We know we're imperfect. I say it this way: man cannot create a government that's better than mankind itself. It is impossible, which means your government will always reflect your brightest light and your darkest demons. Just because we created it does not mean it was perfect. We created a government attempting to solve some problems, and sometimes when we solve a problem, we create two more that then we gift to you. And then, you inherit everything from your parents, and not all of it you want to. You will inherit this country. And I hope that you look at it with a critical eye. I hope you dare to be so bold and brave as to ask yourself, how can I make a difference to make this country better? Right? That's the power of the crown that we've given you. That's the weight. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, and you should feel the weight, you king. One of many, you pluribus, but however, you are a king. What was the question? I thank you for it. Did I answer something in that diatribe? What else? Yes.
You spoke of John Locke earlier when referring to the natural rights of man. What are your thoughts on Jean-Jacques Rousseau when he said that all men are created with these inalienable rights, as you also mentioned, but also that without government they are led to chaos, and that the only way through the chaos is through organized government?
John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the Baron de Montesquieu, second treatise, Spirit of the Laws and Social Compact Theory are three fundamental men, three fundamental philosophers, government theoreticians, and three works that had a profound impact on my life. I'm very happy that you bring up Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Clearly you've read him.
Yes.
Did you read him in this class?
No, I read 2 of his treatises in freshman year.
Mm-hmm. What do you wish to do with this information that you're gathering here?
I want to know.
Not with this question.
Oh,
I mean,
sorry.
with your life. Do you have it all planned out, straight as an arrow? What do you wish to go into government
I
theory?
do not.
No. A local policymaker?
No.
So you wish to be an active, engaged, and informed citizen,
Yes.
and thus it leads you to Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Yeah.
God bless you. I wish, I devoutly, can you imagine a nation of men who understood Locke and Rousseau? I'm imagining it now. We would outlast the Romans. Does man need government? Yeah, it's a bit Hobbesian. You know Hobbes?
Yes.
So yes. So Hobbes sits in somewhat antithesis to Locke, right? Locke is the bright, hopeful philosopher. He believes in the brightness of mankind.
Yes.
I'm a Lockean. And then there's Hobbes, who believes in the darkness of mankind, who says man will spin itself into darkness without the chains of bondage, that is government, which is an interesting concept. Government is created, Isaiah, government is created to chain man down so that man can be free,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And this might be what Jean-Jacques Rousseau is alluding to. So whether that's true or not, let's hypothetically say that I adopt this idea that government is necessary. If it is true to chain man down for man to be free, then we must balance the thing. How many chains?
Right.
Should chains be broken the next generation? Maybe as mankind progresses cognitively, as we amalgamate knowledge, in 6 generations, we are more ready to adopt a concept and thus break a chain.
Yeah.
Maybe government is just enough of a conservative voice to allow for enough of a progressive voice. And maybe in that way, government theoreticians would say government might be the savior of mankind with the right and proper chains at the right time to allow for the right and proper freedoms at the right time. Man progresses over time. We've seen this. Right? Think 150 years ago? Have you progressed in your time?
Yes.
I would hope that is the answer.
Yeah.
Have there been, over time, a few chains broken?
Yeah.
Did that come without controversy?
No.
Bloodshed?
No.
Protest? All of these things are connected. Every one of them. That's why protest is a right. Government should listen to its people, even in times of extremis, perhaps most importantly, in times of extremis. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
I like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Oh, I like them all, but it's so easy. Have you been to Monticello, my home?
I have not.
Oh, come, please. When you go, not if, but when you go, Isaiah, you walk through the doors, you'll enter into a museum portion of my home with all kinds of natural artifacts. And I'm a natural philosopher. I'm actually on the hunt right now for a mammoth elephant. Have you heard of these things?
Yes.
Mammoth? I think they're alive, the mastodon. We don't know everything, but I think they're alive, and I want to find one alive and put it on a boat and ship it to France. That would teach them. But when you go through that room, the front parlor, you pass all my natural curiosities, you go into the next room, turn around to your right, and look high upon the wall. There are 3 paintings: Bacon, Newton, and Locke. And I call those 3 paintings the immortal triumvirate. Maybe we should add Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the Baron de Montesquieu in there somewhere. I thank you for it. You're just in time. Good to see you, Juliana.
Good to see you too.
What else? Yes. What happened?
I have been to your home.
You have? What did you think? No pressure.
I was pretty young, but I remember thinking it was very large.
So that's Monticello number 2 that you went to. Do you know this? Monticello number 1 had built, and I say architecture. The putting up and pulling down of buildings is my greatest delight. Anyone involved in home renovation projects in your own home? Yes?
Always.
It's a great delight, isn't it?
It is.
Until it's not. So I built Monticello number 1, which does not look like Monticello number 2, the one you went to. And then I go to France for 5 years, and Italy, and England, and I see beautiful European architecture for 5 years I'm in Paris, surrounded by three-dimensional representation of man's mind. And for 5 years, this is my knowledge. And then I come back after 5 years and I see the Monticello that I built. I become so crestfallen that I tear down nearly the entire thing and start anew, building the largest dome in the Western Hemisphere. Did you have a question?
I was gonna say, so you were talking about like freedom and the outlines of freedom by government. So would you say that it, like, freedom that the government allows is just that it's freedom, you have the freedom of things that are outlined by the government, that you only have so much freedom?
Well, that's what Madison would have said at the Constitutional Convention. You know, with the Bill of Rights, our Constitutional Convention, I wasn't there, I was in France, but I have some good friends who were there. In fact, at one point at the Constitutional Convention, I'm writing some of my friends at the Constitutional Convention, and I'm writing them so often, they're using my letters on the floor to offer Mr. Jefferson's sentiments in France. And at one point, someone stands up to deliver some oration from one of my letters, and the Chief Magistrate stops the proceedings, and at that point, he's heard enough of all of my letters, and he says, "Gentlemen, we should be careful how much time we are giving to a man who was not elected to be here." But at the Constitutional Convention, there is conversation around rights, of course, as there should be. Now, the U.S. Constitution did it backwards. In my opinion, the Virginia government got it right. That is, first, you declare the rights of the people. Enumerated, that's what you're talking about. Should they be listed, right? Enumerated is the word that we would use, but it simply means listed, spelled out. What are these people's rights? Every one of them. Does that seem wise? Does it?
Yeah.
Then the pushback comes. Do you know what the pushback is? Anyone know? Have you studied this? Enumerate the rights. Sounds good. Someone says, from the back, huh? Exactly. Someone from the back says, what if we forget one? Now, have we codified into the deepest, most fundamental law of our land, have we codified, let's say, 9 rights? And we think those are the 9 rights that man has in this country. But we forgot number 10. What do? Have we created a government that's inflexible? Right? No. Why do you say no, Isaiah?
Because there's ways to amend the Constitution.
Now, if the federal government did it correctly, meaning they declared the rights and then they created a constitution to envelop the rights, that is my preferred pathway, that's the pathway Virginia did it. If they did it correctly, would there have been a need for a precedent to amend the Constitution?
No.
So because they did it backwards, they created a constitution, the envelope first, without even ever knowing what's in the center, it forced them to enumerate these rights later, forcing them to create the precedent for amendment. That is perhaps one of the greatest, I won't say entirely accidental, one of the greatest gifts that we have, right? This conversation allows for future amendment of our Constitution, which means we have not, even by enumeration, even by spelling them out, we have not disallowed future alteration from our Constitution. I say it this way, I might have already said this quote, I lose track of how many and what words come out of my mouth. I might have already said this quote. Our children should not be beholden. Have I said that quote yet? Our children should not be beholden to the laws of my age. You should get your own. That's pretty clear, right? Amendment. Amend. You should have the ability to amend your government. I also say it this way. Man cannot wear the same clothes at 40 that he wore at 14. So should our laws change over time to reflect the progress of mankind. Same sentiment, different way to say it, right? Does that answer your question? Enumeration, valuable, especially for attorneys when parsing out what is a right and what is not, and what was meant by the original intent of whoever wrote the thing in whatever year. But equally valuable is the process of amendment, perhaps even more so. Yes?
So we're talking about the process of amendment in terms of adding rights. How is that going to be different from the way that at least the 9th Amendment addresses that problem by saying, just because it's not in this declaration, this enumeration of rights given to the people, doesn't mean that the government can deny those natural rights to the people. And that to me almost feels like the method of change where as time goes on, people interpret different rights that might not have been thought of in 1776. And it's almost like there's chains being broken. What is the difference in the process of that amendment versus having to completely amend the Constitution?
Well, we already had a convention investigating the Constitution, creating the Constitution. So thus came to pass the first Bill of Rights, the first amendments, and enumeration of rights. We did not need, there's a great hurdle there's a great hurdle. Constitutions are more difficult to change than law, right? I call laws the sails of our ship. I use ship metaphors a great deal when I'm talking about the ship of state. And for me, the laws are sails. They change with regularity, they're easy to do, and should be done quite often. But when you open up the Constitution, there are greater hurdles that you must pass, benchmarks to meet before you can begin opening. That's, you're dry docking the ship at that moment and you're working on the hull and the keel. This is heavy business. The integral, the structural integrity of the ship and our entire nation is at stake here. So don't get it wrong. So that's why we have a higher hurdle to have a convention of states, for example, that open up the Constitution to questions. So processes really could not be more different. One was the creation, they were already there. Now you need a supermajority to open up the Constitution. And I think it's probably wise to do so. We should not be opening up the Constitution every 4 years. Unwise. Laws, yes, absolutely. Every 20 years, I say, as a new generation. And I think that's actually true for you, is it not? Gen X, Gen Z, Millennials, about 20 years, right? Every generation, I say, is 20 years apart. And I say that every law, and this is not constitutional, but it is applicable, every law that we create in my time should have a natural sunset of one generation, 20 years. Sunset doesn't mean it goes away. It means it's popped back automatically over to the House, the current House, 20 years later, where the House can simple up-down vote it, keep it or discard it, or they can shove it over into subcommittee for alteration that they will then submit back to the House for approval and further ratification. This ensures a constant churning, right? Now, this is all sale work. The Constitution, I don't say should and this, I'm very clear on this, the Constitution should not be opened every 20 years. Does that give you some answer on parliamentary procedure of altering the Constitution in terms of enumerated amendments? Yeah. You should have the opportunity to do so, but do it slowly. It's heavy business and you risk a great deal. I see you, and then I'll come back to you. Is there anyone over here I feel I've neglected? You, sir?
I'm good for now.
You're good for now? Yes.
So you were talking about this generational aspect of it every 20 years. So do you believe that it would be better to have politicians that are younger and more fit to the new generations? Or no?
Can a student learn without understanding the generation that exists before him? So is it important to understand the shoulders of the giants upon which we stand now?
Yes.
Even to not with blind veneration, but with a critical understanding of the giants upon which we stand. We often think of the great men and women that we admire, but we do not often think of their teachers. Right? Teachers are the ones who make the men and women that we admire the men and women that we admire. Yes? Teachers. So how can we suppose to have an entire class of politicians, this is not I don't mean this to sound as an ageist comment, but I hope you see where we're headed. How can we expect to have an entire class of politicians all below the age of 25 and not repeat the same mistakes that have already been made?
Can I add on to that?
Yes, please.
So do you think we should set an age requirement though? So like you can be above this age, but like you can't be older than 85 or something?
We have a floor in my time, that is your majority at 21. Ceiling, I don't believe we have such a law in my time. You have to be old enough, but there is no too old. There is no test for such a thing, a politician in my time. Is this a problem in your time? Are you coming up against this issue?
Great.
Oh, you can be, I think this is a brave space. You can be honest with me. I'm only 247 years old. Is this a problem in your time? Do you see it as an issue?
With age with politicians?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what is the, what is the symptom then of this age spread? How does it manifest itself?
Oh.
It's not just that they're old, you don't just hate old people, right?
Can I give an example?
How does it manifest itself? Yes.
School shootings. The older people in any political role there never had to experience a drill, a lockdown drill. It's horrific, especially for the teachers. And they're just not grasping that concept. Even after January 6th, there are politicians that said how scary it was, and then a week later they're like, oh, it was just like a normal tour. That is absurd to me, that they cannot see, understand, and hear what these children go through. That breaks my heart for you guys, and for the teachers. I don't think they can grasp that concept. Do you think that the politicians can grasp that concept?
I think so. For a lot of our aspects of our life, what we have to go through, just I feel like the older generation always ties back to like, well, it was harder for us back then, but like we're trying to make it easier. So why do we want to keep making it harder for the new generations that come?
Harder to change law or become engaged? What do you mean harder?
It's like harder to pursue our natural rights or to have like opportunities that are different than what they had, or like even as well as like have political involvement, because a lot of people are either ridiculed or not looked at because when they do try to intervene.
You know, what's your name?
Mackenzie.
Mackenzie. So many bodies of water in this room. Mackenzie. The truth is, if you wish to create change in this country, the least that you can do, and I don't mean you specifically because you're probably not 18 yet, the least that you can do is what?
Vote.
Vote. That is the least that you can do, literally the least. If you want to do more, then do more, right? So when you come of your majority, not at 21, it wasn't my time, but at 18, and you want to create this change, then I hope you vote. I could not fathom, and I mean this, I could not fathom the amount of right of suffrage that you have in your time. How many people have access to the vote? And then countered with how many choose not to vote. This would be unfathomable to me. In my time, we have the opposite problem. We don't have, if this is your voting spectrum, ours is this. There are 5 voting requirements in Virginia before we begin to whittle them down. You must be male, you must be white, you must be Protestant Christian, you must be 21 years of age or older, and you must own land, at least 25 acres of improved land, so something cultivated upon, and a dwelling at least 12 by 12, 25 acres of improved land, free and clear of mortgage. So when you said wealthy earlier, you're not wrong. Those 5 voting requirements. In Williamsburg, the city in which I lived for 20 years of my life, it's a city of about, can you imagine this? 2,500 people. I know. 2,500 people. Out of the 2,500 people, do you know how many have the right to vote? 100. 100. So that's us. We have other problems. When we begin to relax those voting rights, and even in 170 years, when women get the right to vote, where are my women? We could not fathom the fact that you are gifted the crown and you choose apathy.
It hurts.
It hurts. So if this is an issue in your time, I hope that when you become voting age, you don't forget that this was an issue for you when you were in school. When you become as old men, 40 years old, that you don't forget this issue, right?
And don't think your vote doesn't count.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. in my time, that 5 voting requirements, 100 men in a city of 2,500 people, we have the right to vote. In my time, if you have the right to vote, privilege to vote, and you choose not to vote, you're fined 25% of your annual tax. We see it as an obligation, right? But in solving one problem, we create another, which is, I don't know and I don't care. Does that answer your question
Yes.
somewhat? There was another hand, I've seen it, but I thought, was there one over here? No?
So that topic of forced vote did come up in
Of
our
force?
class at one point. Should we be requiring people to vote?
And what was that conversation like?
Just there's so many people who aren't voting.
Yeah.
Maybe if we required them to vote, then they would take that more seriously.
I paused when I said voting a right, and I self-corrected with privilege, and the truth is, that voting can be taken away in your time. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Certain punitive measures involve the removal of that privilege, and if it were delineated under a right, then we would for punitive reasons be removing the right of someone. But you can alter a privilege and not infringe upon a right, and maybe there's some. If this is a problem in your time, maybe there's some question in there about maybe the punitive measure should come with the apathy.
But then does that then infringe on the freedom of the people?
These are great questions. That's all the time I have. No, I'm joking. Does it infringe on the? If it were obligatory for you to vote, would you? Let's moot court this. Prosecute and defense. Is it an infringement if voting is an obligation?
I would say
So go further. Yes is a fine, I suppose, complete sentence, but it will not do you any good in winning an argument. We'll see you and then.
If I don't think there's someone fit to run, why should I vote for them? If I vote in the preliminaries, if I vote for a candidate I think is the best fit for me, and then it comes to 2 people that I don't think are fit, why should I vote for them? There's no benefit on either side, and there's negatives on both sides.
Does it infringe upon a right? Yes,
I would say,
Mackenzie.
so I would say your right to not vote is another way of saying that's your freedom of speech. Your speech is being like, I'm not voting due to this.
So often, I think that's a fair dissection and assessment, Mackenzie. Oftentimes when we look at rights or privilege, there is usually the other side of it, right? You have the right to life. You don't have the right to take someone's life. I think if we solely look at one side of this issue, we do perhaps disastrous service to the other. Perhaps your right to vote is maybe as protected as your right not to vote. I, as the adjudicator of this argument, hold no side. I'm simply posing back what I hear in some system. Anyone on defense rather than prosecution? Any other side of the thing? Thoughts?
I think it's doing a disservice if you don't vote and then you tell somebody who served the country, thanks for your service. I feel like it's empty words. Do you really?
So even if you don't serve on the field of bloodshed, you can serve this country through voting?
Yes, sir.
The beautiful thing in 17, yes, sorry.
So I was gonna piggyback off of the conversation with kind of being required to vote, kind of as like an antithesis to what they were saying on the matter that if I don't vote, right, it's really I'm voting for whatever politician I think is better, not necessarily the one I like more. It's one I like or dislike the least.
Yep.
That's that even if you don't vote, we are still a very, very large country, and I feel that a lot of votes who might have like the want to vote for I don't know, in the preliminaries, right, we're voting, we're eliminating our candidates as we get closer. That when we're voting for the person we like least is at the very end. That's the final step. So if we can force votage in the first steps, we can kind of narrow that down get more people sharing their opinion and have those politicians be a little bit more crafted to fit the overall. I would like this more than he's fine, I guess.
Exactly, I entirely agree with you, and yes, I have nothing further to add. Did you have something, Washington?
I didn't. I started listening to that.
Oh, and
Look at me all.
flittered away. Yes.
Have you ever trying to enforce a requirement to vote, or even if you're not, you have to remove some of the barriers to voting to make it more feasible?
All right. So you were seeing in your time barriers betwixt a people and a citizen and their obligation or right, privilege to exercise. Yeah. What barriers?
Some places may not have easy to access polling locations, or some people may have difficulty getting off work to go and vote, things of that nature.
So geographic and financial barriers. Can we? What's a solution to one of those? Pick one.
If you're having trouble getting off work on a public holiday, would, in not all cases, cut into any help.
A public holiday. Everyone gets off. How many public holidays do you have in your time? Say again?
What?
A fair few? And voting is not one of them? The greatest right, the greatest bastion of freedom that we have in this country is not viewed as a holiday? You celebrate July 4th, do you not? Even though that's the wrong day? Maybe we should, might sound strange, but maybe we should encourage some congressmen to look at holidays. Not for them. Let's move topics. Who has a question, a burning, yearning question? It can still deal with government theory and philosophy, but anything else about my life? You can ask me what I ate for breakfast. No.
I was gonna ask about like something government related.
That's all right.
Okay.
I love government.
Do you think that one government has like a responsibility to help other governments abroad, or like help foreign groups as well? Because I think that's kind of an issue that's arising a lot in our time.
So when you say aid foreign governments, does our government have some?
And to what extent should it be done, right? Is it fair for them to get fully involved, or is it like, should, monetary be the extent to which it should go?
Monetary meaning our money's floated towards them.
Right, but
Towards
not
other
like our government.
I'm not a hawkish president or person in general, you know what I mean by that. I'm a pacifist in many ways when it comes to war, and especially involvement and embroilment in other nations' wars. There are several times in my life where my stance is very clear that this is their problem, and we will sit as much as we can on the outside. But that's theory.
When does it in your opinion, when does it become our problem?
I dealt with pirates when I was president. Do you know this?
Yeah.
You do? Is this where you're headed? This is why you asked the question?
Well.
You just want to talk about pirates.
No, but I did hear about you having to deal with that.
Yeah. So these are pirates from Morocco, Algiers, and Tripoli, on the shores of Tripoli. At that moment, we were engaging in worldwide trade. For the first time, this country, we had certain navigation acts in the lead up to the Declaration of Independence, and the navigation acts said that we can only trade with one country and one country alone, England. That means even products that we create here, have to be shipped on an English ship to an English port, and then we can buy it back with tax, right? So when we declare independence, navigation acts are no more, and we can trade with everyone around the world. Do we have a navy at that time? Well, do we have a big navy?
No.
So how can we protect our commercial interests around the world, right? Literally protect them. We are easy pickings, right? So these pirates from Morocco, Tripoli, Algiers, they begin to pick off our ships. They confiscate our goods for selling at their own profit. They steal our ships and even our our sailors, forcing them into slavery. Even. So when this begins to happen, now it's a foreign policy issue, and me being a rather pacifist, but we can't stand for that, right? So I'll press back fairly hard, and eventually we'll send some Marines and seamen over there with some new frigates, and we'll stop the issue. We'll press the issue all the way to their shores. We will prosecute the action, not the religion. Now, that's you asked about aid, and I'm talking about military, right?
Well, that kind of had to do with it, yeah.
Mhm.
So it's like, basically you're saying that when it starts to affect us economically or in other ways, that's when we act, not necessarily when it goes against like ethics that our country stands for.
Oh, well, yes. What speaks louder, though, dear friend? Money or philosophy?
Right.
Yeah? What's your name?
Mara.
Mara? Yeah, moneyed interest, if you ever want to move policy, find how the dollar affects it, right? And then you'll find movement, or how it's affected by the dollar. Now, in terms of aid, I'll say this. When I propose ending slavery here in the United States of America, which I do several times, I have plans that I propose trying to end the slave trade and slavery at large. And none of it ever pans out, but I propose it several times, and I push hard several times, and I'm lambasted in the press, and I lose friends, and nearly lose my career over it. But my plan to end slavery. So I have foreign policy with military might in protecting our interest, economic interest overseas. My plan to end slavery is about aid. My plan is to educate all of our slaves at the state's expense. Educate them. I say according to his or her particular genius. If he or she has a particular genius in the arts of agriculture, he or she so shall be educated. The same with mathematics. So I'm applying, it does not matter. Whatever your natural aptitude is, that's what you'll be educated in, paid for by the state. Secondly, we give them tools of the trade, whatever trade. So if they're educated in agriculture, they get, I don't know, oxen and a cart, right? Maybe some seeds. And then, I ship them back to Africa from the country from whence they were stolen, even though some of them have lived here 7 generations, right? Ship them back to Africa. Create a society for them, a Liberian society. But because they have no protection for their own borders, we will supply our military to aid the protection of their borders until they progress enough that they can protect their own, and then finally we step out. As far as a very specific example of aid to a foreign country, I think that's a fascinating one because it involves both domestic and foreign policy in the slave trade, which is always an interesting topic to get into. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Liberian society, have you heard of Liberia? Anyone?
Yes.
Anyone know the capital of Liberia? You do?
No, I have a question.
Oh, anyone know the capital of Liberia? Monrovia. Do you know who was a good friend of mine? James Monroe. When I pass away, this Liberian project that is close to my heart, that I press upon for a great majority of my life, I pass to my eldest daughter, Martha Jefferson. Martha Jefferson presses it with Monroe, and thus Liberia and Monrovia are eternally tied to the slave trade, the inception of this country, and our efforts to end it. What was your question?
How come you speak so highly of freedom, but you own slaves?
That's a great question. How can one speak so highly of freedom and yet own people? There's a difference between philosophy and reality of life. I am what you call a human. And humans, are they perfect or imperfect? You know this from personal experience? Yes? My imperfections, you will be subject to the same foibles, faults, hypocrisies as me. You will not escape this life with the same reputation with which you entered upon birth. Right? At some point you will make decisions, sometimes difficult decisions, and you will be judged. History will judge you. What's your name?
Reagan.
Reagan? History has already judged you. But history will judge you, right? As history should. And history will perhaps not be so kind to you. History might even say, you hypocrite. Right? You knew X, and yet you did nothing about it, right? You knew of this problem, and yet you did nothing about it. Yes? And history will call you hypocrites. It's one of the most beautiful ties that will bind you and I. You hypocrites. So how can I say this thing? Well, it's something that I believe. I believe that all men are created equal. It's in a philosophy of John Locke, but it predates him. In the 6th century, in the Justinian Code, one of the first written systems of law, it says that man in nature should have the same rights as man in our society, in our government. So an equitable system of rights placed in law in the 6th century in the Justinian Code. My God, I'm not going to know who I am if I lose this. So it's an ancient idea, it's a philosophy. But there's a difference between philosophy and law, right?
Yes.
Which one is better? It's a kind of a stupid question. Let me ask it this way. Which one sits on higher authority? Why?
It's more practical.
There was unanimous law. I suspected you would say philosophy. Does law reach to philosophy? Does law aspire to be philosophy?
Yes.
Does law fail
Yes.
to aspire to be philosophy? So, is your law behind your philosophy? Meaning it has some work to do.
Yes.
I say it this way, philosophy and natural philosophy, sciences, are the two engines which promote change within government. Philosophy and natural philosophy. So the more we engage with philosophy, the more we will hopefully see our law change. So the idea that all men are created equal, this is a philosophy. But we don't see it in law, in my time, right? So there's a discrepancy. Our philosophy sits here, our law sits here, and we are attempting to marry the two. One of the many things that I propose to ending slavery is a marriage of our philosophy and our law. If I believe that all men are created equal, then I must do something about it, right? In my Virginia Constitution, I made slavery entirely illegal in Virginia. Do you think they adopted my Virginia Constitution? No. My Declaration of Independence, which you've read, yes?
Yep.
Had an anti-slavery clause inside. Did you read that? You didn't. Any guesses why?
Because it didn't make it.
It didn't make the cut. When I came back to Virginia, after writing the Declaration, I proposed a bill making the slave trade illegal in Virginia. Do you think that's going to fly? One of my first court cases, in 1770, I had a court case called Howell v. Netherland. You can look it up, Howell, Howell v. Netherland. Now, we were on prosecution. We were prosecuting for Samuel Howell's freedom, which means he's a slave, right? Samuel Howell is my client. I took on the case pro bono publica. You know what that means? For free. I take on the case for free because it's a philosophy that I believe in and I think I can win. I'll try to be very brief with this case. I'm on prosecution. We're at the highest court in Virginia. You've heard of a Supreme Court? That's where we are. The highest court in Virginia. I'm on prosecution. I'm the youngest attorney there. On defense is my law teacher. So we're prosecuting for Samuel Howell's freedom. And if I win this, I will not just win his freedom, I will win every third generation mulatto's freedom in Virginia. This affects thousands and thousands of this case. I cite two laws in Virginia, 1723 and 1705. These two laws first bind a mixture of race, the law in 1705, and I apologize for this language, but I think you're smart, yes? And you can accept what history has written, even if it's tough, yes? The language in 1705 law in Virginia says any abominable mixture of blood is bound in lifelong slavery. That hits, doesn't it? Yes? It does not say they're children. What generation is Samuel Howell?
Third.
Does this come important now?
Yeah.
17 years later, 1705 law to 1723, there's a shift in slave code in Virginia. In 1723, there's a new law passed that says any child born of her body. It's no accident that it was 17 years later, right? These first mulattoes are beginning to have children of their own. The second law in 1723 says any child born of her body is bound in servitude, but it misses the ad infinitum portion. What generation is Samuel Howe? Third. So 1705 and 1723 covers 2 generations, but not the... Have I won the case already? Have I?
Yeah.
Can a court protect a law that doesn't exist?
No.
So I've won, right? That's my opening remarks. Well, actually, I end opening remarks with this. I point at the bench. This is the highest court in Virginia. I point at the bench and I say, any man sitting up here, wicked enough to protect a law that does not exist, should not be here upon the high bench. And I have cousins up there. And then I end opening remarks with this. The year is 1770. And I end opening remarks with this. In nature, all men are born free. Prosecution rests. Defense goes to rise to present opening remarks. There's a bunch of chatter on the high bench. There's a hubbub. They call halting to the proceedings. And the chief magistrate eventually, after about 60 seconds, turns around and says, we've heard enough. The court finds favor in defense. Defense. Defense did not have to say a word, and the highest court in Virginia protected a law that did not exist. So when we talk about philosophy, what we believe to be true, what we know to be true, our philosophy, and yet our law doesn't even meet it. And then our courts choose to not only understand and protect law, but create law, apparently. The court at that moment was also the legislature, right? How do you win in that society? You know, we're talking about a legislator that doesn't listen to us, right? Same. I was young once.
I think we had one more question if we have time.
Yes, I'll be quite brief. I know we're low on time.
This is the last question.
Last question.
So to that point of, you said that you were arguing for philosophy over law and that there was, not everybody was agreeing with you, would you say, and I don't know if you were the one that like explicitly outlined the 20-year clause where you would revisit slavery after 20 years? Was that in the Constitution? Or-
No, that proposal, and I apologize if I was murky in my delivery of such, that was just a proposal. It was not yet law. Every law is a proposal first, right? And then everyone gets their hands in it and has opinions about where the commas are. And some of them don't even make it into committee. They're tabled or put away. So that was a proposal. Never really saw the light of day, but it was pure Jefferson thought, meaning it was not polluted by a committee. This is pure Jefferson thought, thinking about the advantageous movement forward for this nation, and perhaps a sunset, a natural sunset, might be beneficial to mankind going forward. Does that answer your question? I love you all, and I mean that. You give me great hope. I mean that. Thank you for being advocates of history. Thank you for being advocates of education. I say that history is the most important subject that man might study, period. So thank you. Thank you.
Always so great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
How do you want to proceed for the last few? Do you want pictures? Yeah, there's some pictures if you all want.
Yeah, if you want a picture, step in.
Step in. We've got a camera up here with film, so we can probably take some pictures.